Hello everyone and welcome. Today we're back on Remnant 2 taking a look at another build, a build where if you are like me and are pretty bad at the game, you're going to love. Now, just a disclaimer, this is not a DPS build. So for those hardcore players who like to come stand in the firing range here and get their DPS as high as possible, this is not going to be for you. This is a tank build where the game is played on easy mode. So let's get right into it and explain along the way. As our archetypes, we are using Invoker as our primary. Now, Way of Kaula is a great skill. It brings a lot of passive DPS, but we're also using Invoker for the great passives that we get along the way, such as the 5% damage reduction that we get while an Invoker skill is active. As our secondary, we're using Handler with the Guard Dog. Now, the Guard Dog brings us a lot of awesome things, such as the 50% damage reduction, plus we also get some really great passives from the Handler tree, melee damage, movement speed, all sorts of awesome things. Let's jump into the gear. For our armor, we are using Leader Mark II Helm, Leader Mark II Armor, Leader Mark II Leggings, and then the Labyrinth Gauntlets just to stay under the flop weight. So you can see we're at 74.3 and 187.9 armor. For our heart, we are using the Profane Heart, which gives us a little bit of lifesteal. For the relics, we are using melee speed, health, and damage reduction. Now you can switch things out a little bit here, but I do recommend these three in the heart. For our primary gun, which won't matter too much, we're using Monolith, mainly to apply exposed, and we're using Spirit Healer in the gun to bring us a lot of good healing when we are popping the Sandstorm. As our backup, we are Nebula with Spellweaver. This is going to just allow us to pop more mods and more skills more often. Nebula is also good for some good passive DPS. Now for the star of the show, the Crystal Staff. The Power Stone reads, charge melees and power the staff for 10 seconds, causing melee attacks to launch an energy bolt that seeks enemies and deals a bunch of damage, and we gain stacks for every time it does damage, and when reactivating the heavy attack, it will send out a bunch of really powerful ranged projectiles that will auto track. And of course we're using this with shielded strikes, which shields us for 10% of our max health when a melee attack lands. For our amulet, we're using Navigator's Pendant, 25 health, 25 stamina, minus 10 armor encumbrance. If you don't have the Navigator's Pendant or just the rusty version, you can use that. Our first ring is Dead King's Memento, followed by a Ring of the Robust, followed by a Hardcore Metal Band for the Bulwark stacks. And lastly, in our flex spot is the Atonement Fold, which allows us to keep up our Bulwark stacks at all times, but this can be traded for something more offensive or defensive. Something like the Dried Clay Ring can also give you a lot of good damage, especially when you're always at 5 stacks of Bulwark, or you can even go something like Cooldown, or maybe something defensive that involves melee attacks, but I really enjoy Atonement Fold. It just makes the build a bit easier, and our whole theme here is easy to play, so that's why we're sticking with Atonement Fold. Now for our traits, which are not optimized at all currently because I'm currently missing 2 that I would really like to include in the build, but you can see we're using Gifted, Kinship, Regrowth, Triage, Vigor, Spirit, Expertise, Blood Bond, Barkskin, Siphoner, Recovery, and Fitness. If I was you and you had these 2 things, I would drop the 5 points in Recovery and Fitness and put the 5 points in Fortify instead. That's going to give you a much higher armor value, about 240, 250, and just overall increase our damage reduction. But you can also take points out of Expertise and put them into something like Strong Back, so that instead of the Leader Mark II set, you can use the Leader Mark I set, which is going to give you a much higher armor value, but at a little bit more weight. I am unfortunately lacking the traits, therefore I cannot put this on, but in an ideal world you would use all Leader Mark I and still be under the flop weight so that you have maximum damage reduction. As for our tonic, we're using Mudtooth's tonic for the massive 20 health increase, pretty staple for this build. You see we're sitting at 218.7. But that's going to wrap up everything we're actually using in the build, so let's break it down on how it actually works. So our 2 primary guns aren't there for damage, we're really just using it for the mods, Nebula for the passive damage, and Monolith for the exposed from the Sandstorm. So ideally you want to start by popping the mods, then pop Way of Kaula to get the skills rolling, and then activate your charge staff. You can see I didn't pop Way of Kaula here just so I can show you how the charge staff works, but you can go ahead and then release those charges, and it's just going to shoot out to random targets and auto home nearby. An interesting technique you can use is you can actually face away from enemies. It doesn't work that well here in the firing range, but if an enemy is in front of you, you can turn and face away from him, and basically the projectiles will track behind and go to the target for you. But here you can see a proper demonstration, Way of Kayula followed by a guard dog, followed by both of our mods, empower our staff, and then just start melee attacking. You'll see that the shield builds up really quickly, and those stacks that are building up below our health, there you go, we release them, and that just does a ton of damage for us. Now a couple things to note while I'm just swinging away here, is while you're mobbing, just going through areas in the game, you don't need to focus too much on keeping Way of Kayula and your guard dog skill active, because you're honestly so tanky that most normal enemies in the game don't really pose a threat, and it only comes from bosses. Now as I said before, this is not a DPS build. I'm going to leave you with 2 mobbing gameplay scenarios as well as a Ravager fight where I honestly had no problem at all, and you'll see that our damage is low but we never ever die. That's going to be it for me though. If you enjoyed, please consider liking and subscribing, and until next time, farewell.